Across Pennsylvania and New York, there are towns that were never supposed to decline. Cities filled with factory whistles, railroad yards stretching for miles, steel mills that lit the night sky, factories so large they employed entire generations of the same family. For decades, these companies seemed unstoppable. They built locomotives, produced steel, manufactured firearms, pressed records, made clothing, developed photographic film, and provided thousands of jobs throughout the Northeast. But today, many of those factories stand empty. Some have been demolished. Others sit abandoned behind weeds, crumbling brick walls, and rusting chain-link fences. Yet each one helped shape the communities around them. And when they disappeared, entire towns were forced to reinvent themselves. When most people think about lost employers in Pennsylvania and New York, a few famous names immediately come to mind. IBM and Endicott Johnson Shoes, Bethlehem Steel. Those companies were industrial giants that employed tens of thousands of workers and helped shape entire generations. In fact, we've already covered some of those stories here on the channel because they deserve documentaries of their own. But they weren't the only companies that built the Northeast. Scattered across Pennsylvania and New York were dozens of other employers that once dominated their communities. Some built locomotives that traveled around the world. Some manufactured steel, firearms, records, cameras, and clothing. Others became household names before quietly disappearing from history. Many employed thousands of workers. Some employed entire towns. Yet today, most people have never heard of them. Tonight, we're stepping beyond the famous names to explore 16 forgotten companies that helped build Pennsylvania and New York and what happened when they vanished. Our journey begins more than 200 years ago in a small village in New York's Mohawk Valley, where one of America's oldest manufacturers was just getting started. Long before most American factories even existed, Remington Arms was already manufacturing firearms in the Mohawk Valley. Founded in 1816, the company became one of the oldest continuously operating manufacturers in the United States and served as the economic backbone of Ilion for generations. Through wars, economic depressions, and changing ownership, the factory remained a constant presence in the village for more than 2 centuries. But bankruptcy filings, lawsuits, corporate restructuring, and shifting production strategies gradually weakened the company. In 2024, the historic Ilion plant closed permanently. Originally employing thousands, approximately 300 employees lost their jobs during the final shutdown, bringing an end to over 200 years of firearm manufacturing and closing one of America's oldest industrial chapters. Few companies symbolize the Industrial Revolution more than Baldwin Locomotive Works. Founded in Philadelphia in 1832, Baldwin grew into the largest locomotive manufacturer in the world. At its peak, tens of thousands of workers built steam locomotives that operated on railroads across 6 continents. More than 70,000 locomotives were produced by the company during its long history. But after World War II, diesel-electric locomotives rapidly replaced steam power. Unable to compete effectively against General Motors' Electromotive division and General Electric, Baldwin's market share collapsed. Locomotive production ended in 1956, and tens of thousands of jobs disappeared as one of Pennsylvania's greatest industrial employers faded into history. While Baldwin dominated Pennsylvania's rail industry, countless smaller manufacturers were rising throughout New York's southern tier. One of them was a Binghamton company whose products ended up in offices, factories, and homes across America. Founded during Binghamton's manufacturing boom, Titchener became one of the region's most important producers of staples, wire products, nails, and specialty metal components. The company supplied industries across the country and employed generations of highly skilled tool and die makers. For more than a century, Titchener remained a fixture in Binghamton's landscape. But changing economic conditions and the broader decline of American manufacturing eventually took their toll. Operations ceased in 2005, ending more than 120 years of production and leaving behind another vacant factory in the southern tier. For much of the 20th century, Sharon Steel helped make Farrell one of western Pennsylvania's major steel-producing communities. At its peak, Sharon Steel and neighboring mills employed roughly 10,000 workers throughout the Shenango Valley. But the collapse of the American steel industry during the 1970s and 1980s placed enormous pressure on the company. After multiple bankruptcies, Sharon Steel closed its main mill in 1992. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs immediately, while thousands more had already been displaced. The closure devastated Farrell and became one of Pennsylvania's most significant industrial losses. If Baldwin ruled Pennsylvania, ALCO ruled New York. Formed in 1901, the American Locomotive Company became one of the largest locomotive builders in the world. The Schenectady plant employed thousands and helped define the city's economy for generations. But ALCO faced the same problem as Baldwin. The steam era ended. Competition for General Motors and General Electric crushed profits. By 1969, only about 1,100 workers remained. That year, the plant closed permanently. An era of locomotive manufacturing in Schenectady came to an end. Hallstead Foundry began as a lead crystal operation before transitioning into iron castings and industrial components. For decades, the foundry supplied machinery parts and supported families throughout Susquehanna County. Although much smaller than Pennsylvania's steel giants, Hallstead Foundry represented the type of local manufacturer that once formed the backbone of rural communities. As manufacturing patterns changed and competitions increased, operations gradually declined and eventually ceased. Today, little remains of a company that helped sustain the local economy for generations. By the early 20th century, the Northeast wasn't just building railroads, steel mills, and factories. A new kind of industry was emerging. Instead of locomotives and iron castings, these companies produced cameras, film, instant pictures, computers, and the technologies that would help shape the modern world. Photography once employed hundreds of workers in Binghamton. This company evolved through many names including ANSCO, GAF, and Anatech. For decades, it produced photographic materials and imaging products. But digital technology changed everything. By 1999, the facility closed and another major southern-tier employer disappeared. Digital Equipment Corporation became one of the most important computer manufacturers in the world. Although headquartered in Massachusetts, DEC employed thousands in New York and throughout the Northeast. But the rise of personal computers changed everything. When Compaq acquired DEC in 1998, approximately 21,000 jobs were lost worldwide. Founded by Edwin Land in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and employing thousands in New York and Pennsylvania, Polaroid transformed photography. At its peak, the company employed roughly 21,000 workers. But digital cameras made instant film increasingly obsolete. The company entered bankruptcy in 2001. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared worldwide. Katz provided steady manufacturing jobs for generations of Wayne County residents. The company became one of Honesdale's largest employers. But like much of the American garment industry, production eventually moved elsewhere. The factory closed, taking hundreds of jobs with it. Before Walmart arrived, many northeastern Pennsylvanians shopped at Sugarmans. What began as a small drugstore evolved into a regional retail institution, employing hundreds across its stores. For decades, it was a destination for everything from appliances to clothing. Competition from big-box retailers eventually overwhelmed the company. The flagship store closed in 1995. Long before Walmart dominated the retail landscape, shoppers throughout the southern tier visited Philadelphia sales, where they were greeted by the smell of popcorn. Founded in 1933, the discount retailer became a regional institution with stores in Binghamton, Endicott, Owego, Waverly, Sidney, and other communities. Often described as the Walmart before Walmart, Philadelphia sales offered everything from household goods and clothing to seasonal merchandise and hardware. For decades, the company provided stable retail employment and became a stable part of everyday life throughout the region. But by the 1990s, growing competition from Walmart, Kmart, and other national chains placed enormous pressure on local retailers. The main Binghamton store closed in 1998, followed by the remaining locations. The company disappeared, leaving behind memories of a retail era that many longtime residents still remember today. Long before digital music, streaming services, and even cassette tapes, millions of Americans listened to records manufactured in Northeast Pennsylvania. The Capitol Records pressing plant opened in Scranton in 1946 and quickly became one of the most important records manufacturing facilities in the country. Operated by Capitol Records, the plant pressed millions of vinyl records that were shipped to stores throughout the United States. During its peak years, the facility employed hundreds of workers and played a direct role in the success of some of the biggest names in music history. Records by Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, the Beach Boys, and later the Beatles were pressed in Scranton before making their way into American homes. Collectors can still identify many of these records today by the distinctive IAM triangle stamp that appeared in the runout grooves of records produced at the plant. For nearly 3 decades, the factory provided stable manufacturing jobs while helping make Scranton an unlikely center of the American music industry. But by the early 1970s, changes in record manufacturing, corporate consolidation, and shifting distribution strategies led Capitol Records to close the facility. In 1973, the Scranton plant shut down after 27 years of operation. Hundreds of jobs disappeared, and one of Northeastern Pennsylvania's most unique manufacturing stories quietly came to an end. Today, few people realize that some of the most famous records ever sold in America were once pressed in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Few people realize that one of the world's largest record manufacturing facilities stood in Lackawanna County. The Olyphant plant pressed records, cassettes, CDs, DVDs, and VHS tapes for major music labels. At its peak, more than 2,300 employees worked there, making it the largest employer in Lackawanna County. Then the internet arrived. Digital downloads replaced CDs. Streaming replaced physical media. In 2018, the plant closed after more than 70 years. The history of Pennsylvania and New York isn't just the stories of railroads, factories, and products. It's the story of workers. Entire families spent generations inside these plants. Entire towns depended on them. And when the jobs disappeared, communities were forced to reinvent themselves. Some succeeded, others never fully recovered. But across the Northeast, the factories may be gone, but their stories remain.